What's up? My name's Jackson. I've never watched soccer before, but I'm watching every single game in the World Cup. And I'm going to be breaking down today's games: Portugal versus Uzbekistan, England versus Ghana, Panama versus Croatia, and Colombia versus DR Congo. And we're only halfway through Colombia versus DR Congo, so I'll only do the first half of that one. But it's been quite the day. Not necessarily my favorite, not necessarily my least favorite, but it's been quite the day. Normally I am joined by a co-host who knows more than me about soccer, but today that is not the case. Trust I will have one again tomorrow, but today I'm just going to be breaking down the matches, so it'll be a shorter one today. So going in, we'll just break in and right in, and so we'll do Portugal versus Uzbekistan first. And this was my first time ever watching Cristiano Ronaldo. And going into this, I had heard he was not good anymore. I had heard he was washed, he was trash, he was worse than Messi. And it was my first time watching Messi yesterday. And I do not claim to be able to answer the who is the GOAT debate. That seems like it's no longer as much of a debate right now because I've only ever watched each of them play one time. So I am not one to answer that question, but I will say that I enjoyed watching Portugal and Ronaldo more than I enjoyed watching Argentina versus Messi. Now, why? What is the why behind that before I break down the actual game? It has to do with the fact that Argentina is so Messi centric. There's a lot of teams with a star player that played yesterday. France with Mbappe, Norway with Holland, and today Portugal with Ronaldo. And Messi with Argentina is the only team that exclusively passes to Messi. Their whole strategy, and no shame on them. I mean, if it works, it works. If they win, that's great. It's just less entertaining. But their whole strategy is get the ball and find a way to get it to Messi. And then the other team is forced to defend basically around Messi so that Messi can't get the ball because once he gets the ball, you know he's going to find a way to score. And that's pretty much what I saw yesterday. But we're talking about Portugal versus Uzbekistan. And the reason I'm talking about Messi is because now we're talking about Ronaldo. And Ronaldo, I think, came into this game not having scored a goal at the World Cup yet. And he's supposedly second only to Messi. So he I think had a lot to prove today, especially because Mbappe and Holland also scored so much yesterday. And he came in and he hit a goal in 6 minutes. And that was a great goal. It was exciting, right? A great way to kick off the day's games. And going into this, by the way, my prediction was Uzbekistan was going to win 2-0. And I now understand that was a ridiculous prediction. And I kind of did know that Ronaldo would be on Portugal's team, but because I had heard the news that he was starting to, play bad, I made the Uzbekistan win prediction, assuming that every team with a star as big as Messi or close to as big as Messi would be Messi centric, or in this case, Ronaldo centric. And if Ronaldo was washed, then Portugal must be washed as well. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. The score ended up being 5-0. And, that's a shame for Uzbekistan. Going into the second half, the score was already 3-0, and Ronaldo had scored twice. The second goal, he didn't even kick it that hard. It just kind of rolled in there at about half speed. And you hate to see it. You hate to see Uzbekistan, who is trying to win, just get destroyed by a team that they probably thought would maybe not be as hard as they had originally predicted back when the groups were first being assigned. So the question becomes, are they able to come back in the second half? And they weren't. There were two more goals. One of those, I believe, was an own goal from Uzbekistan. So you hate to see it. I feel bad for Uzbekistan. I feel bad for myself for predicting so poorly. But that being said, it was a fun game because so many different players on the team of Portugal scored. so many different scenarios led to scoring, and that's what's fun for me. That is what I'm discovering is cool about soccer is the way teams solve different scenarios. And the thing that made Argentina so boring for me yesterday is that they only solved the scenario one way. Messi's going to solve the scenario. And that's great. Good for them. I'm glad it works. It's just less entertaining for me. So personally, at this point, I'm preferring Portugal and Ronaldo. But that being said, I've only seen one game out of each of those teams, each of those players. So maybe it was that way yesterday and today, and then next week they'll switch. I don't know. We'll find out, and I'll come back and I'll report. But at this point, I'm finding Portugal to be more entertaining than Argentina, but I understand the merits of Argentina, and that's great for Argentina, and I hope they continue to do well. And I, feel bad for Uzbekistan. I don't think that they're definitely eliminated necessarily. I know there's a Colombia versus Congo outcome that can maybe eliminate them, but at this point they're not eliminated as the score is still 0-0 in that game. So rest up Uzbekistan, feel better. That was rough. All right, moving into the second game of the day, England versus Ghana, and and going into this, I had heard of one player between both teams. I had heard of Harry Kane. I've been calling him Hurricane because my co-host, the ear, last night was saying his name a little fast, and I heard Hurricane, and so that's how I heard of Harry Kane. And I found out earlier that day that a curse had been put upon him by a Ghanaian witch doctor, whose name I do not remember, but I don't want to invoke anything, so I won't say it. But a curse had been put upon Harry Kane. And, obviously, you never want to curse people. That's so fucked, especially over a soccer game, a game that has little to no impact on anything. It's not even the knockouts. But they did do that. And we go out into the game. I'm ready. I'm sitting down. I'm ready to watch someone who's described to me as being up there with all those names I mentioned earlier. Messi, Ronaldo, Mbappe, Holland. And they were talking him up in the commentary team. And that's great. But this was a 0-0 game. I went in there not knowing anything with my prediction being 4-2 England, and there were no goals scored. And sometimes, as in, the last 15 minutes of that game, 0-0 can be interesting. But when both teams are just resting on their laurels, it is not interesting. It's just boring. And if you're a soccer fan, a football fan, you might say, well, it's not about is it entertaining? It's about they're trying to win the game. But are they? Number one, are they? If they're in back gear, I don't think that they are. I think that there was a lot that went wrong in the first 10 minutes for both of those teams that led to, them taking a chill pill. I think in the first 10 minutes, Harry Kane went down holding his head, and that looked real. That didn't look like a flop to me. So, I hope that was not the curse. And we get into the second half, it's still 0-0, and I was hoping for better. And in the last 15 minutes, it was a little bit better. It was more back and forth, but it just held at 0-0, and this was a boring 0-0. I didn't like it that much. And that's all I have to say. In contrast, the other game in that group today was Panama versus Croatia, who did hold 0-0 for quite a while, but they were much more interesting. Panama was fiery and fast and fierce, and Croatia, had more poise and was graceful and tactful, and it led to an interesting back and forth scenario happening where no one was really hitting anything, but both goalies were just stopping things left and right. There was bombardment after bombardment until finally in the second half, Croatia got a goal. And it was hype because we've been waiting for them and they've been striking back and forth. And I was hoping Panama would get a goal too because they were explosive. They definitely deserved a goal, but they never could quite get it in. They came close, but they could never quite get it in. and that means that they're eliminated from the tournament. Now, I know that they have another game to play, but I wonder how does that impact your morale when you already know that it doesn't matter what you do, you can win your game by 100 points and you're not gonna be in the World Cup after that. Does that affect you? It must. It must. I think that Panama should hold their heads high because they played great soccer from the 20 something games that I've seen. Again, I've not seen much, but in the last couple days they played very interesting, and I like interesting. Interesting is fun, and I assume people will get fired because of the loss and of not even making it to the knockouts, but I don't know how well did they do in relation to their country's history. Maybe they did great. I'm not totally certain, but I did enjoy the game, and congratulations to Croatia. Moving on. I've only watched the first half of Colombia versus DR Congo. It's actually just resumed, and we're at about 49 minutes, but the score is still 0-0. That being said, this kind of feels like a similar game that I've seen many times now, where one team just seems to play much better than the other, and they're making many jabs at that team's defense, and they've not hit anything yet, but they're going to, and it's pretty clear they're eventually going to, and if they don't, it will surprise me. And I'm talking about Colombia. Colombia is just jabbing, jabbing, jabbing at Congo, and Congo's doing a great job holding them off. We'll see if they can hold them off, but I think that at this point, Colombia looks like they're probably going to win, and it is still 0-0. And that's all I really want to say about the game because it's not finished. But what it says as a whole, because there have been so few goals scored today, besides the Portugal Uzbekistan game, that 0-0 can be so many different things. That's the thing that I'm learning because I was so bored by England versus Ghana. And Panama versus Croatia had some moments where it was really heating it up. And Colombia versus DR Congo right now is interesting to me, but I'm just kind of waiting. And I'm excited to see what happens. But it goes to show that 0-0 can mean so many different things in soccer and to the audience. Now, obviously, in a crowd of people, everything's going to be more hype. But I'm not in that crowd of people. I'm watching soccer on the TV in my living room. And then I talk about it with my friends and I post reels about it, but I'm not there live. I can hear the crowd, and the crowd can sometimes get me excited. The Mexico crowd many days ago, they were on fire. The Canadian crowd many days ago, they were on fire. A bunch of crowds have been on fire, and that does increase the enjoyment of the game for me. But at the end of the day, I'm still not there. So a lot of things aren't going to be as interesting. And I'm just kind of reporting my findings as somebody new to soccer. But I love tournaments and I love competition. And so watching this has been very fun so far. And this is the last match of match day 2 before we get into seeing the teams again. And I picked up on the first match of match day 2, which was South Africa versus Czechia, I believe. And that was boring. But I didn't know at the time that was boring because that was my first soccer match I'd ever seen. So, not to ramble, but I just 0-0 can be interesting from a audience standpoint, a crowd standpoint, but it depends how the game is being played. And I think England versus Ghana, in a long wraparound way of me getting here, was just not played hard enough and with enough intention. But I'm excited to see maybe in their third match what England can do and what Ghana can do as well because I feel as though I've not seen it all. But it was a good day. It was fun. I especially liked the Portugal match, like I said. And some moments of Panama versus Croatia were great. And I've yet to see how the rest of Colombia versus Congo is going to play out. But I will see, and we'll see how that goes. Well, thank you so much for listening. I will be back in a couple of hours tomorrow morning with my predictions for the next day of the World Cup and the first day of match day 3. There will be 6 games, and we will talk about them all tomorrow morning. Have a great night. Thank you very much. Bye bye.